We're talking about something even more fun than finances, and that's bitterness and anger. And I don't want to do that alone because I'm not that brave. So I have a friend coming to help me do that. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Johnny Green. Come on, Johnny.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Hey, thanks for being here. Feeling good?
Yeah, feeling great. Feeling fantastic.
Hey, we made it one service already, so who knows what could happen here. Johnny, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself so people who don't know you and think, who is this person with a magnificent beard sitting here?
And he's got tattoos, too. He should be on the stage.
Oof.
Security, get up here. My name's Johnny. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I'm the Celebrate Recovery Director here at Highlands Fellowship. I've been in recovery for 10 years, and during this time, I'm celebrating recovery from a porn addiction, sexual addiction, and masturbation. I'm currently struggling with overeating. I'm struggling with image issues, which is the reason I have to adjust my shirt when I sit up here because I'm kind of self-conscious. And I'm just really glad that God has given me this opportunity to be able to speak to you guys and speak from my heart.
Hey, thank you so much for being here. As we were developing the series with our teaching team, Pastor Allen shared with us as we were talking about, some things that we were and then we weren't. He said, I get a lot of emails, probably more emails than anything from people saying, man, I'm struggling with bitterness, with anger, with a lack of forgiveness. I don't know how to forgive that person that hurt me, or I'm just dealing with this internally. And so I said, hey, let's tackle this in a conversation. And let's bring Johnny because of really your willingness to share and your experience with Celebrate Recovery. We'll talk a little bit about that as something that we offer at our Bristol location for people every week. So we're talking about bitterness. And over the last couple of weeks, Robbie, great message. Steve, great message the last 2 weeks. And they both brought out the dictionary and defined some things. I thought, hey, I have a phone. I have the dictionary. We can define this. So what even is bitterness, right? It's a thing that everybody knows how it feels, but what would Webster say about bitterness? Here's the definition of being bitter. So it could be about people or their feelings or behavior, a lot of options. Angry, hurt, or resentful because of one's bad experiences or a sense of unjust treatment. And that second part, I think, is where a lot of us find ourselves, right? Is dealing with that unjust treatment. Someone hurt me.
Exactly right.
And I don't know how to deal with that.
Or let me down.
Yeah. Another definition, this is from someone named Stephen Diamond, who's a PhD psychologist. And this is how he defines bitterness: a chronic and pervasive state of smoldering resentment.
Smoldering. That's a big word.
Yeah, we're going big. Today, it's but you know what that is. It's just smoldering. It's always in the background, ready to jump into the foreground. And so as we start this conversation, why don't you just share maybe about some experiences that you've had where that bitterness, that smoldering has come about?
Well, that's the reason I'm here. It's because I have struggled a little bit with bitterness. And by a little bit, I mean a whole lot. Bitterness can come from anywhere. It can come from you going to McDonald's and asking for light ice, and them not giving you light ice, and then you drive to where you're going, and then you blow up on the next person. Bitterness is something that can come out of nowhere. And it's incredible to see how much of a hold it can have on our lives. So in my life with bitterness, I've had bitterness towards my wife over her not meeting my expectations. I've had bitterness towards employers because I would expect them to treat me one way or them treating me the exact opposite. There's a lot of stuff that is going on inside my life currently that I really have to check myself to make sure I'm not allowing bitterness to define who I am instead of Christ as my Lord and Savior, because it can and it will consume your life if you allow it.
Yeah, I think that's the lie that bitterness tells you, is that it's just going to be a little bit, I'll just be a little bit mad at my spouse, I'll just be a little bit mad at my boss, I'll just be a little bit mad at my, kids or whatever it's like. And that little bit, that seed that is planted is going to grow into a tree of anger. It's gonna bring some destruction. I want to read a set of verses here. This is going to kind of frame all of what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. So it's a lot, but you guys can do it. I believe in you. Ephesians 4:25 through 32. This is going to be kind of our framework of what we're talking about. Here's what Ephesians 4 says. So stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbor the truth, for we're all part of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good work, and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit in the way that you live. Remember, he's identified you as his own, guaranteeing you that you'll be saved in the day of redemption. And here's the kicker. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of other evil behavior. Instead, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Especially for bitter people.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? You read that and you're like, okay, sounds good. But it's like, then you start thinking about it and it's like, where are places in my life that I'm letting sin and anger control me? Where am I, not acting generously? Instead, maybe I'm not stealing like people's stuff, but where am I kind of taking for myself?
Yep.
And bitterness really does that, right? It takes for itself. It places you in the role of the victim and the hero sometimes at somehow at the same time, right? It's this confusing state of I'm really angry and I'm really important.
Yep.
And so, how do we deal with that, right?
I think the first thing you have to look at how the verse is set up with Ephesians 4:25-32. You can see the seed of anger being planted inside of our lives. And all of us we have been angered one time in our lives. But as the verse progresses, we can see it getting bigger and it's progressing inside of our lives. So the seed turns into a root. And as the root takes place into our heart, it comes out into the fruit. And you can see the fruit with the harsh words, rage, anger, bitterness, because as James said, with the smoldering thing, it all comes out at one time. So that's something that we have to really keep an eye on inside of our lives. And I've heard bitter people are a lot like porcupines. They have a lot of good points, but they're really scary to be around. You don't want to be around those people because they can hurt you with their words, and we have to be careful with what we say.
Yeah. We talked about this in the last gathering, and I thought it was so good, was that, the context of how you're sharing things really determine where your heart is.
That's good.
Right? And just like you said, people with a lot of good points, but they're not fun to be around because they'll poke you.
Yep.
There's a difference between speaking, right? It says in this verse that we should tell the truth to one another. We should take care of one another. But there's a difference between caring for someone who's part of your same body and poking someone else because you're like, I'm right. Zzz. Yeah,
Yep.
But if you're part of the same body, you're like, you're not going to poke yourself, right?
Yep.
You're not going to be like, yes, I need this truth, right? You're going to care for yourself. And as we see each other in this way of being united together, man, that's important. For us to know that we're not alone.
Exactly right.
And, for you, we can share a little bit now about CR. Maybe just share with people, what CR is and how that kind of works for us.
I will gladly give a shameless plug of what Celebrate Recovery is. We meet every Tuesday night at 6 p.m., and we're open to anyone. A lot of people, when they hear about Celebrate Recovery and addiction, they automatically go to the big three: drugs, sex, and rock and roll. You have to be an addict to be a part of it. It's a lie. You do not. It is a part of our ministry, is a part of this church. Anyone who is sitting inside of this building and anyone who's watching online can and will benefit from attending Celebrate Recovery. We meet, we have worship. A lot of addiction meetings you see takes place inside Hollywood films in a back room of a building with a bunch of creepy people. I'm about as creepy as you're going to get when it comes to Celebrate Recovery. It's a very loving, honest environment. We worship. We're real. We have large group teachings. And then we have the landing also. And the youth, the middle school through high school, are doing the exact same thing because, believe it or not, kids are struggling just as much as we are because we were once kids. And that root and the fruit is still growing.
Yeah, I was reading a study recently, and it was, it said that, I'm trying to remember exactly how many percentage, it was at least 80% of millennials that they interviewed said that they were lonely.
Yes. I struggle with loneliness.
And I thought two things. I bet it's more than that, because you'd have to be honest enough to say that to someone. Hey, do you struggle with loneliness? You're like, yeah, you better believe it, brother. It's like, no. Like, maybe you don't even want to say that. And two, I thought, man, how hard is it and interesting is it that in the most connected world that we've ever had, that being alone is the result of almost this over connection. And that's true for me. The world's at my fingertips, like on this thing. But man, sometimes I can feel alone, and bitterness is gonna Bitterness is going to bring you back into that loneliness, right? It's going to pull you back away from community, away from other people to say, no, they don't know. If they knew the hurt that person caused me.
Yep, that's exactly
If they
right.
knew how I felt. And man, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of that. I can say that from stage, that have been times in my life that I've wanted to hold on to something and have held on to something because I didn't want to let it go. It's like Lord of the Rings. You're carrying the ring. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, you know. If you don't, it's a book. It's very good. It has words. It's also a movie if you want to watch that. But, there's a ring. They got to bring it to Mordor. The ring is destructive, but it feels so good, and you just want to touch it. It'll kill you.
My precious.
Yeah, my precious indeed.
Yeah.
And but that ring's going to kill you. It's powerful. And that's what bitterness is. It is a powerful emotion. In fact, one of the psychologists from Psychology Today said this. It said it's one of the most destructive and toxic of human emotions.
Yep.
And I read that and was like, yeah, I believe that, right? I think that's pretty true.
That's exactly right. I totally agree too. And you have to choose bitter or better. You can't have both. We can't come in here and worship Christ the way that we need to worship when we're constantly allowing our thoughts to go somewhere else. We have to choose bitterness or betterness. And it's sometimes when we are justified in our anger, at least we tell ourselves we are, it's like, you don't know what that person done to me. Now, I have no doubt in my mind, in a congregation this large, there is people who have dealt with physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. There's no doubt in my mind. And even years after this took place, we still allow the perpetrator to control our lives currently. And bitterness can and will control our lives. The only way that we could ever move past this is by saying, I forgive you. Now, it's not something that you can do, and it might take place overnight, but just those 3 words is something that really can change our lives. And if we're as Christ followers, we know how much forgiveness means to us, but we must be willing to offer that also.
That's good. Sometimes bitterness, it feels better in the moment, but that feeling never lasts. It might feel good to hang on to that. And it could be as small as, I love your example about driving through the drive-thru, because I feel it's like, I asked for light ice and they didn't give it to me, and that's because they don't like me,
Exactly right.
Or how dare they put ketchup on my burger, Don't they know? It's like, what? That's not a big deal, but it can be in that moment, and it feels good sometimes, if we're honest, right, to just like hold on to some of those things. I can remember a time, my wife and I had just gotten married, and we had just moved back to the area and just like trying to figure out life and do things, and things were crazy. I was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Our life was just kind of like a crazy train. And I'd been thinking about grad school, like we graduated. I was like, do I want to go back to grad school? I kind of thought I did. Found this one in Seattle, not close.
Not at all.
Pretty far away. A lot farther away than even our Bluefield campus. And although it feels like Bluefield's far away sometimes. But, it was like, so one night, we were both working together at a photography studio. And so we come home, we're like tired, right? Cammie's making dinner. And I just casually mentioned, hey, thinking about we should move to Seattle. She's like, I don't know if I want to do that. Fair enough, right? No context, right? There wasn't like, hey, I need to tell you something really important that's on my heart, or whatever Christian language you want to use. I just said it. Now, in my head, I was being as honest as I could be, but the context was not that. And she's like, I don't really want to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. I like played it off. And then on the inside, I'm like, I'm crushed.
You're terrible.
And why would she say she doesn't want to? Well, it's probably because.
She don't believe in you.
Yeah. And it's swirling. It's like, I'm not good enough to move. I shouldn't do that. You know what? Forget it. I'm not going. And I did.
Yep.
And 5 years later, we were sitting in marriage therapy, and we were talking, which was good. If you don't go to marriage counseling, you should. It could save your marriage. It really could. And even if your marriage is great, you should still go to marriage counseling because it's good for you to go. But we were sitting in therapy, and she says something, and it just like brought that thing up in me, that smoldering thing. She threw a little gas, and I was like, let's go. You know what? You remember that time that you told me that you didn't want to move to Seattle? And she's like, starts laughing, and I'm like, that's not cool. I'm looking at our therapist, like, you see this? And I was like, why are you laughing? And she's like, because I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yep.
I don't remember that. And I'm like, I've based a lot of decisions off that, you know? And then so I feel two things at the same time. Number one, I feel dumb because that doesn't make any sense. Why have I been holding on to this? And number two, I just felt this overwhelming sense of freedom to let that go.
That's a lot, man.
Because in that moment, in the levity of that, that's not what I thought would happen, right? Because I thought, I'm right. I'm going to win because I'm the victim, right?
That's right.
And I will slash you down, you know. But instead, what happened was I opened my hands and I let go.
That's good.
And please don't hear me say that as like now I'm some expert. Like I'm just telling you one example of some bitterness that I let go of. But that one's so real for me because it was an important thing outside of context that I didn't let her walk into. And so many times in our lives, and maybe you would agree with me, the context of what we're doing, bringing people into that is so, so important.
Exactly right. Exactly right. One thing when you attend Celebrate Recovery, we offer anonymity and confidentiality. What it pretty much means what you hear here stays there, who you see here stays there. So no one will ever know you attend Celebrate Recovery. And the reason I say that is when people come in, you see real. You don't see the facade that we put on when we come into the church on Sundays and say everything's great, when we just had a knockdown, drag-out fight with our spouse because the kids won't listen and it's always me having to deal with this. We don't see that at CR. When someone's having a bad day, we say, hey, do you have a second? We have a conversation. We've learned to be real. And I've learned that bitterness comes out a lot with you always blank. Why am I always having to talk to you about blank? Bitter people like to bring up the past. They like to throw it at you. Bitterness and our past stuff is a very good ammunition. It's something that's gas that we can throw in that fire. So if you want to go, like you said, if you want to go, let's go.
Because it's smoldering, right? It's always available.
It's about to blow up.
Yeah.
Blow up. So with bitterness, bitter people won't let go of anything. It's a great thing that Jesus Christ was not bitter with us and he let go of everything.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Ephesians 4:32 is talking about is that we're forgiving one another just as God through Jesus Christ has forgiven you. This is a verse that I thought was really interesting and really will show the context of this because when I first read it, I thought about it in one way. And as we started talking about it, I started thinking about it in a different way.
Yep.
And let's play this out. This is Job 10, verse 1. And Job, character in the Bible, has some difficult stuff come up in his life, right? All of his friends are like, curse God and die. And he's like, no, I'm struggling with this. I want to believe God. And, you know, he's having conversations with God about who created the world. And then, so here's what Job says in Job 10. He says, I'm disgusted with my life. Let me complain freely. My bitter soul must complain. And so when I first read that, I thought, well, this is what happens, right, when we feel bitter, is like, let me share. I got some words for you about my bitterness, right? When we're in the context of maybe me defending that to other people that don't know. Or maybe it's you, I don't know if you've ever done this, I have, on your commute to work, you let somebody know just all the things. You never tell them that, but you're like, I won that argument, you know, or you do it in front of yourself in the mirror. It brings more bitterness. But then there's this other way, as you were sharing about in CR, about sharing openly or about being in a group of people where you can be honest, where saying those things could actually release that, right? Hey, I need to share something with you. I'm feeling really bitter. That's different than, hey, I need to say something to you, right? Yeah. Like you hear the tone shift in that. And so now I'm reading this verse and I'm thinking, man, the context of how I'm sharing and how I'm speaking is going to determine the outcome that I get.
That's exactly right. I mean, in the Bible says, confess your sins one to another and pray for each other so that you may be healed. There's only one way we can find healing is through this. We have to be able to talk to someone, and having a group like Celebrate Recovery or just your circles that you use, if you can be 100% honest with everyone inside of your circle, it is a great opportunity to do so. With Celebrate Recovery, we have men who are sharing with men, ladies who are sharing with ladies. So we always have freedom inside of that group to talk about whatever is going on inside of our life in a healthy manner instead of having the imaginary conversations like we have on our way to work. So we're going to tell our boss off when we get there.
Yeah, and then he's saying like, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. How's everything going?
That's right. So, here's the reality. Sitting in that bitterness is like drinking salt water. You think it's helping, but really you're just making yourself more thirsty. And imagine with me in a moment before you knew, because we're all saying, we're like, well, salt water is bad for you. It's like, imagine if you didn't know that. And you were you find the ocean and you're like, man, a world of drinking ability.
Yep.
How cool. I'm thirsty. And then you start drinking and it doesn't feel good.
Not at
But
all.
you're like, maybe I should drink more. I don't know. I don't know what I should do, right?
Yep.
But when in reality, you're like making yourself extremely sick and actually more dehydrated. And the reality is finding one good drink of water would do so much more for you. But in that moment, it's like, this didn't feel good. Maybe I'll have another, right? This didn't feel good. I'll yell louder. I'll blow up more. I wasn't clear enough how upset I am.
Exactly right.
And so there is a tension there. And so in Ephesians 4, it's clear what we do with that tension. And it's a word that starts with F that is less angry, and that would be forgiveness.
Yep.
But it might be a really hard thing for us to do.
It's very hard, especially, as I said a little bit ago, about someone who's went through abuse situations. Being able to forgive someone who has abused you is not something that you can easily do. And sometimes it does take counseling. It does take having real conversations about how you truly felt. Not to point blame, not to look at yourself as like I'm a bad person, because for some of us who are sitting here who have went through these situations, the greatest thing that you can say to yourself right now is it wasn't my fault. Sometimes we have to say that to be able to move forward because we're allowing this person to control us. And sometimes we're allowing it by not saying, you know what, I wasn't to blame. I need to be able to move forward from this. So forgiving may start with just saying, all right, I forgive you today. Forgive you today. And tomorrow you may have to do it again.
Yeah, one of the articles that you sent me, I thought this was really good. It talked about how it said, I'll just read the point they said. They said, be aware that forgiveness is a process, and even small hurts may need to be revisited over and over again. And so, you can forgive someone and not forget, right? Totally. It doesn't discount the pain. It doesn't discount that. And I think when you're sitting in that bitterness and anger, you're like, if I forgave them, I would negate all this hurt. I would, this really hurt me.
Yep.
But forgiveness isn't saying I'll never remember that anymore. It's saying that I'm gonna remove myself from that role of being that victim, and I'm gonna take a step, right? And some things are easier to forgive than others, right?
Yeah.
And so please don't hear us saying like if you've experienced some trauma in your life, then you should just be like, hey man, it's cool, we're probably fine. Like that's not at all what we're saying. But it's really about letting go of that hold, that thing that's kind of ensnaring you, and taking one step. Because one step toward forgiveness is going to be something that kind of resounds in your life in other ways.
I had a lot of bitterness towards myself when I did commit adultery on my wife. She totally forgave me. Now, this is rare. I fully believe this is rare. And my wife, she is an angel because she never brought it back up into my face. So anytime we would have arguments, she would be like, she would address the situation we're addressing currently, not something that went on into our past. But as I was working my recovery, 3 years into my recovery, I was still apologizing for what I had done, for every emotion, every feeling she would have. I would be constantly apologizing because I felt that I was to blame. And then I found out through her words, she said, Johnny, I have forgave you. God has forgiven you. It's time for you to forgive yourself. I was bitter towards myself the entire time, and I was my worst enemy. I had to be able to forgive myself. And it starts with me. And Psalms 139, 23 through 24 is a verse that you guys need to write down. If you think you struggle with even a hint of bitterness, or if you want a challenge from God, Psalms 139, 23 through 24. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is anything offensive in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. When we say that prayer, be ready, because as he searches your heart, he will bring stuff to your thoughts that you're like, okay, maybe there is something I need to work on inside of my life.
That's right. You hear people say, you talk about your thought life and how what you think kind of determines what you do. But as we were researching for this kind of conversation and this message, I really thought about the opposite being true as well. And that is how you speak about something is how you think about something. Yep. Because the company that you keep, I can tell when I find myself prone to complaining about something that there's a deeper thing going on that's agitating me, right? It just kind of comes out, and then it gets reinforced in your thought life, which gets reinforced in what you say. Yep. And breaking that cycle man, sometimes it's hard for me to think differently. It's hard for me to like get that in my mind. I've got to just like speak differently.
Yep.
And maybe that's a confession, right? That's what Ephesians talks about, confessing those things to one another, to not let the sun go down on your anger, to not let those things boil up inside of you, or maybe it's just to be around people that speak life into you.
It's important.
Finding a group of people on Wednesdays right now during this study, you can gather at your campus this Wednesday and have this conversation. So you're invited, you get to do this too, and share with each other openly and encourage one another. And I can about guarantee you that if you would be in a group of people that you can encourage one another, that's going to change those thoughts and those processes in your mind as well. Because you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to be a victim. You're not alone.
Yeah. Inside of recovery, we saw people who are always victims. They're on a pity pot. They can't get off the pity pot because they're always pity me, pity me, pity me. And once you get to where you can be real with a group of individuals and you can be honest with them, you can start to admit that, hey, you know what, maybe I do have some issues I need to work on. And that's the first step in actually finding healing and becoming better instead of bitter. So that, you've got to look at your own life and be able to say, I'm going to stop blaming others and I'm going to start moving forward in victory that you do have through Christ.
Yeah, and it's a step at a time. It's a moment at a time. I read this verse in Proverbs last week, and I thought it was really interesting, and when I first read it, I didn't like it, so I'm going to read it to you, and we'll walk through it together. Proverbs 19, verse 11, a person's wisdom yields patience. It's one's glory to overlook an offense. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's uncomfortable, because it should say, because I have all the knowledge, I can tweet better responses back at you, right? Because I can do this, I will comment on your Facebook thread, or whatever. It's like I know the things, right? I'm the porcupine. I can poke holes in your argument like a balloon, Yeah. But a person's wisdom yields patience. And then it's one's glory to overlook an offense. When I first read that, I thought, well, is that saying that I need to just get over it? But really, to overlook something is to see beyond that thing, to see beyond that offense. And so it doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean it's not real, right? The Bible's not saying, that verse in Proverbs is not saying, hey, that hurt you experienced, don't even worry about it. It's nothing. It's like, no, it's like a muscle, right, to restrain that, to hold back that weight, and to get to overlook that offense. You see it, and you get over that. And so now as I'm reading that and praying through that, I just feel like God's really reminding me that I don't have to have the last word. And maybe you're sitting here this morning and you feel like, yeah, that's me. I gotta get the last word in. I gotta make sure that I'm top dog, or, whatever. I got the answers, and I won't overlook an offense because I'll let you know that I see it all. I'm watching you. I see what you're doing, right?
Yep.
But man, there's freedom in moving forward. There's freedom in taking those steps. And really this morning, we just want to give you an opportunity over these next few minutes to do that. So many times you come in, there's great worship, there's a great message, you feel challenged or inspired, God's speaking to you, and then we're like, see you next time. It's like, okay. But this message is different. And that I think all of us are going to feel something different, experience something different. And maybe throughout this time as we've been sharing, God's kind of been pulling up some things. That smoldering's kind of coming. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not bitter. And you're like, oh, maybe I am, right?
Maybe sure?
Maybe there is something there. And we just want to give you a chance to respond to that and to take a step, right, toward forgiveness, to take a step toward that. Maybe that means today you need to go have a chat with somebody. There's a good chance it's your spouse if you're married, right? That you need to talk about something, or a friend, or a family member, or a coworker. Maybe tomorrow you need to pencil in, hey, can we go get coffee? And I just want to share something with you. There's so much power in going first. And that's what we see at the end of Ephesians 4 and verse 32, right? Forgive each other as God has forgiven us through Jesus, who decides that he's going to go first, that he's going to come, and he's going to love us all the way through that and live in humanity and experience all those things for us. So he can say, I know.
That's right.
I know. Not just I know about it, but I know. So God knows. He does. He knows. And man, today I hope that you're encouraged and challenged. I hope that this message I don't know, hit you in a way that you can do something with it this week. And so right now at all of our locations, your campus pastor is going to come out and they're going to lead you through a time of prayer and reflection. And I hope that you'll just take this time, take advantage of this time. And I want to thank you so much for being here. Johnny, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And I'll see you next time.